The opening bell on the Toronto Stock Exchange had barely fallen silent this morning. A report crossed the wires that I had to read 3 times to believe. Canada has just made a move that nobody in Washington saw coming. Tonight, it could change the entire structure of the Western Alliance as we've known it for 75 years. Prime Minister Mark Carney walked into a European summit in Armenia. He stood beside leaders who have spent decades treating Ottawa as Washington's quiet partner, and delivered a message that sent shockwaves through NATO headquarters and the White House alike. The international order, he suggested, could be rebuilt out of Europe. Let that sink in for a moment. A Canadian Prime Minister, the first non-European leader ever invited to the European political community, is openly talking about a world where the United States is no longer the indispensable nation, and the timing, given what President Trump has been doing on the world stage, is no accident at all. Mark Carney arrived in Armenia carrying an invitation that itself was historic. No leader from outside Europe had ever been welcomed into that gathering before. Think what that means symbolically. European nations, watching the chaos unfolding in Washington, decided that Canada belonged at their table, not as a guest, not as an observer, but as a full participant in conversations about the continent's future, its security, and its economic direction. Carney did not waste the moment. He spoke about reliable partners, about deepening ties with countries that honor their commitments, and the subtext was something every diplomat in that room understood instantly. The opening bell on the Toronto current administration no longer qualifies. The backdrop to all of this is a NATO crisis, the depth of which we have not seen in generations. President Trump recently launched military strikes on Iran without informing the alliance beforehand, then turned around and demanded that NATO members help him reopen the Strait of Hormuz. European capitals were stunned. They learned about American military action the same way ordinary citizens did, through news reports. And then they were told to clean up the consequences. Combined with Trump's statements about taking Greenland and his repeated suggestions that Canada should become the 51st state, you have an environment where allies are quietly asking themselves whether the foundational assumptions of Western security still hold. Former US Ambassador to NATO, Ivo Dalda, put it plainly, something fundamental has broken inside the 75-year-old alliance. For decades, the underlying assumption was simple. The United States provided the security umbrella under which Canada and Europe could prosper. Carney's pivot reflects a recognition, perhaps long overdue, that this assumption may no longer be reliable. Ottawa is no longer willing to bet its national survival on the predictability of decisions made in Washington. And so, the Prime Minister is building alternatives, openly, quickly, with the full backing of a Canadian public whose patience with their southern neighbour has been exhausted. Now, let me turn to the dimension of this story that often gets overlooked. I'm talking about the economic strategy Mark Carney has been quietly assembling behind the diplomatic headlines. Carney has set a target of doubling Canada's non-US exports to roughly $600 billion within the next decade. That number is not aspirational language. It is a deliberate signal to investors, to trading partners, and to the Canadian public, that Ottawa is no longer willing to accept the structural dependency that has defined this country's economy for generations. Carney has signed new trade arrangements with China that unlock approximately $7 billion in Canadian agricultural exports. Markets that had been constrained by years of tension. He is actively pursuing partnerships with India, with the ASEAN bloc of Southeast Asian nations, and with Mercosur, the South American trading group that includes Brazil and Argentina. Each initiative is a deliberate choice to build redundancy into Canada's economic architecture, so that when Washington imposes tariffs, Ottawa has alternatives ready to absorb the shock. Layered on top of this is a $1 trillion public-private investment plan focused on infrastructure, critical minerals, energy diversification, and technology sectors that will define the next several decades of economic competition. Pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and private capital from across the democratic world are being courted to participate. European, Asian, and Latin American, rather than American. Trade relationships create political constituencies. When German manufacturers depend on Canadian critical minerals, when French firms rely on Canadian grain, when Japanese companies build supply chains through Vancouver and Halifax, those relationships generate diplomatic weight that Ottawa can deploy in moments of crisis. The challenge is the speed of the transition. Trade deals take years to mature. The Trump administration can impose tariffs in days. That asymmetry is the central problem facing Ottawa right now. On the security front, European leaders are now seriously considering a future in which the United States is no longer the leader of NATO. That sentence would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. France has long pushed for European strategic autonomy. Germany has dramatically increased defense spending. Poland has become one of Europe's most heavily armed nations. The UK is coordinating closely with Paris and Berlin on contingency planning. And into this evolving landscape walks Canada, bringing its Arctic geography, its military capabilities, and its enormous economic resources. Canada controls vast stretches of the Arctic, a region of growing strategic importance as climate change opens new shipping lanes and exposes vast new resource deposits. Canadian cooperation with Europe on Arctic security would create a new northern security architecture that does not depend on American participation. The decision to strike Iran without informing alliance partners violated the core principles of NATO in a single action. Honor your commitments, share information, and consult before taking major steps. All three broken at once. Ivo Dalda's warning that something fundamental has broken inside the alliance is not hyperbole. It is the considered judgment of a man who spent his career inside NATO structures and understands precisely how fragile institutional trust can be. Mark Carney's pivot is not a finished accomplishment. It is a process, and it faces serious obstacles. Canadian provinces like Ontario and Quebec depend heavily on American supply chains and markets. Western provinces export oil, gas, and agricultural products through pipelines flowing southward. Rerouting that trade requires massive investments in port infrastructure, trans-Pacific shipping capacity, and new pipelines flowing eastward and westward, rather than southward. The transition will be painful, and the political costs will test the durability of this government's mandate. For the United States, the implications of losing Canada as a near-automatic ally are profound and underappreciated. Canada has provided diplomatic cover for American positions in international forums. It has hosted American military installations. It has shared intelligence at unprecedented levels. A Canada that hedges its bets and builds alternative partnerships fundamentally changes the strategic calculus for every future American administration, regardless of party. Trust, once broken at this level, does not simply return when leadership changes. The assumptions we held about the permanence of American leadership, about the inevitability of Canadian alignment with Washington, about the stability of the post-war order, all of these are now being tested as never before. And the outcome will shape the world your children inherit. Please hit the bell icon and subscribe to my channel for daily updates.